In the early 1920s, just years after the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia and established the Soviet Union, tensions between East and West were already rising. Western governments, particularly Britain, France, and the United States, were deeply suspicious of communism and concerned about the spread of revolutionary ideology. In response to that anxiety, and to protect the fragile young Soviet regime from both internal dissent and foreign espionage, Soviet counterintelligence devised one of the boldest deception operations in the history of espionage. It was called Operation TREST. TREST, meaning the trust in Russian, was the code name for a fake underground anti-Bolshevik organization created by the Soviet secret police, the Cheka, later the OPU, and eventually the KGB. The purpose of the operation was to trick Western intelligence agencies into believing there was a powerful, well-connected resistance movement operating from within the USSR, determined to overthrow the Bolshevik regime. In reality, TREST never existed as an actual opposition force. It was a fabrication, carefully built by Soviet intelligence agents to lure in real anti-Bolsheviks and foreign spies. The plan was simple: pretend to be the enemy, so the real enemy comes to you. To make the illusion believable, the Cheka created a fictional network of monarchists, military officers, and former Tsarist officials supposedly hiding in Soviet cities, waiting for the right moment to strike. They sent letters, arranged meetings, used encrypted messages, and built elaborate false identities for agents posing as members of this internal resistance. They convinced émigré communities in Paris, Warsaw, and Berlin that a coordinated rebellion was in motion, but needed help from abroad to succeed. The West took the bait. British intelligence, particularly the Secret Intelligence Service, SIS, began funding and supporting the supposed underground movement. Money, weapons, and communications tools were smuggled into Soviet territory, often through Finland or Poland. These deliveries were immediately intercepted by the Soviet secret police, because they were the ones requesting them in the first place. One of the most tragic victims of Operation TREST was Boris Savinkov, a former revolutionary and his opponent of the Bolsheviks. Savinkov had once been a terrorist fighting against the Tsarist regime, but after the revolution, he became a devoted enemy of Lenin's government. Living in exile, he received messages from what he believed were fellow anti-Bolsheviks in Moscow, high-ranking officers and intellectuals urging him to return and help lead the rebellion. Convinced the resistance was real, Savinkov made the fateful decision to secretly cross the border into Soviet territory. Within hours of his arrival, he was arrested by Soviet agents. Isolated, interrogated, and ultimately broken, Savinkov agreed to a public confession in which he renounced his views. Shortly afterward, he died, under mysterious circumstances. The official cause was suicide, but many believe he was murdered by the Soviet state to silence him. Another notable target of TREST was Sidney Reilly, the legendary ace of spies and one of Britain's most effective intelligence operatives. Reilly had a long history of undercover work in Russia, and was believed by many to be one of the most dangerous men alive for the Soviet regime. Enticed by messages from the supposed anti-Bolshevik underground, Reilly was drawn into the TREST trap. He secretly entered the Soviet Union in 1925, hoping to make contact with the resistance and coordinate sabotage operations. Instead, he was captured by OPU officers, interrogated, and executed in secret. His death sent shockwaves through the Western intelligence community and marked one of the first major victories for Soviet counter-espionage. Operation TREST ran for nearly 6 years, from 1921 to 1927. During that time, it exposed and neutralized dozens of real anti-Soviet conspiracies, misled foreign governments, and helped the Soviet state strengthen its internal security. It was a stunning success for the Cheka, and a devastating blow to the Western intelligence services that had fallen for the lie. But over time, cracks began to appear. some Western analysts grew skeptical of the operation's reliability. The resistance never seemed to achieve anything concrete. Too many of its operatives disappeared. Too much funding led to no results. Eventually, the operation was quietly shut down by the Soviets once it had served its purpose. In the years that followed, the Soviet Union would perfect the art of counterintelligence deception, using fake networks, double agents, and planted information to manipulate adversaries. Operation TREST became a blueprint for future operations, and a stark lesson for Western agencies in the dangers of believing what you want to believe. What makes TREST unique is that it wasn't just about catching spies, it was about controlling the very narrative of dissent. By pretending the resistance existed, Soviet intelligence became the resistance. They didn't just watch their enemies. They became their enemies, then crushed them from within. Even today, nearly a century later, Operation TREST is studied in intelligence academies as one of the earliest and most effective examples of strategic deception in modern espionage. It was the moment when the hunter became the bait. And the world learned that in the shadows of espionage, nothing is ever quite what it seems.